We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us, talking about voting, redistricting. Kendra Lee with the Equity Alliance. Kendra, thank you for joining us from Memphis. It's our final segment this morning, and just talking about getting out. You know, in the country, not just in Tennessee, but across, I see already in Texas, they've got some voting issues coming up because all the legislatures have passed these new, we got to make sure the voting's accurate and there's no fraud. And we all know, fraud is very rare, but that became an issue last election. And some of that, I think a lot of people have concerns with these new requirements with IDs or things you have to show to prove that you are who you are, is going to keep people away or reduce the vote. How big a concern is that for you? I know that's a little off the point of redistricting, but it all ties together.
So we have managed to have a workaround to every barrier that's put up in the name of election integrity. And I think that when you opt for the language, like look at the language, like you have those that say that they're proponents of election integrity, whereas myself, I prefer to, use the term voter protection because it's about the person, it's not about the system. And so you can't have an election without voters. And so if you see one party prides itself on winning elections based on when as little people as possible vote.
Right.
And that's not how elections work. That's not how elections should work. The person with the most votes is going to win, but you should not make an active effort to try to make sure that there are very few people that can vote. A true democracy, true representation, a true reflection of where we are is when we have the opportunity for as many people that are here contributing to our society to be able to vote for who it is they want to be able to represent them. And so I think that when you talk about voter IDs and everything of that nature, which I think is completely preposterous. We are in 2022. There are so many other ways that we can be able to use our own agencies that work every day to make sure that you can be able to confirm the identity of someone. We do not have to have voter ID. We do not have to have a person physically registered to vote, whether they use a paper, whether they use online. You shouldn't even have to do that. We have too much technology. We are too far advanced for us to have such archaic methods of trying to make sure in our voter process, but those methods are there to be a hindrance and not to be a help. However, in order to combat that, like I mentioned before, we have to be able to ignore the barriers and can continue to do what we can, continue to challenge them, continue to assist our neighbors where we can, and continue to show up to vote. And I know that, a lot of the times it feels as though it's easier said than done, but time and time again, the Equity Alliance and other organizations here across the state, we have challenged these laws, we have challenged these methods, and we've been victorious more times than we haven't. And so we have to be able to step up and challenge when we see something wrong. When you see something, you say something. And so we know that a lot of the ways in which things have been happening, especially with the elections administration process, unfortunately, elections seem to be very secretive, very quiet with the administration process. There's not a lot of transparency that's there. We don't really know what's going on a day-to-day basis. And we're here to change that narrative. We want it to be very clear what's going on. We want people to know what's happening at each step of the way. And I think the more that we opt for that transparency, the more that we're opting for engagement. Like we truly want every single person to be engaged. And we're fully aware of some of the things that are coming down the pipeline as far as legislation, as far as rules. But like I said before, we continue to do the work to make sure that when these things don't seem right, when they don't feel right, when we know that they end up having disparate impacts on our people, that we do something to change it. And so even though we know that there are a lot of things that continue to happen, whether it's on a state level, whether it's on a federal level, we're going to be right here. We aren't going anywhere. We're going to continue to make sure that every single person who is in this state has the right to vote, and they are able to use that power the way that everybody else should be able to have it as well.
As I just listened to you talk, Kendra, I can just tell the more this kind of stuff comes at you, the more motivated you are to continue with this message. It's not like, it's easy sometimes, as you said, for people to get discouraged or back off. Just listen to her and take a page out of her book that you still, am I right? Because I'm telling you, I think the more that comes at you, the more that you become dedicated to making sure to get out concepts that we should all agree on, whether you're Republican or Democrat, that everyone should have equal access to vote. Okay, that things should be drawn fairly. That's all we ask. But we all know politics come into play. You just get more motivated the more they throw at you, don't you?
Yeah. Listen, it keeps me with a job. So unfortunately, as long as they're here, I'll be working. And, you know, hopefully we can be able to turn our efforts into other things so where we don't have to work as hard every day, because we will be in a place to where we can guarantee that our elected officials are working on behalf of all constituents across the state. And that doesn't have to be something that's unrealistic. It doesn't have to be this utopia of sorts. We can be able to work towards those things right now. And that's what we do with the Equity Alliance and with our other partners as well. But as you mentioned, there's always something to do. I don't have to take a day off if I don't want to, but I'm here to do the work, and I'm happy to be able to be in this space.
Let's take one quick call. We got one call before the end of the show from Tom. Tom, good morning. Hi, Tom.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, Tom.
I'm calling in because I did want to change the subject, but I saw something on the news this morning that approximately 52% of Tennesseans are vaccinated, and approximately 48% of Tennesseans are unvaccinated. I would just like to see you address that on some morning line someday.
Sure. I mean, we can get to that. You know, that's off topic, Kendra, but it's just, when we talk about how people have different, approaches, whether politically or otherwise, it comes into play with vaccinations too. I mean, that just, when he talks about how many people still aren't vaccinated and people have different opinions on that, it just, again, shows how divisive sometimes things are, and it's hard to get people sometimes to see the things in the same way.
Yes. But I will say that it all circles back to governing.
Yeah.
As constituents, as people, you can do, what it is that you want. But even with the vaccination, and for us to be in year 3 of a pandemic, like, it just is a reflection of poor governing. And for us to still be in this situation, like, we can circle back to elections because our state leaders drop the ball. There are very common sense things that could have been put in place and they just weren't in place. And so now we are entering in year 3 of a pandemic, and there could have been a lot of things that could have been done with mitigating this from a very effective governing standpoint, but elections have consequences. And so when it was time to show up and have true leadership in our state, we didn't have that because of who we have in leadership right now. But to circle it back to making sure that the representation is there, that the process is fair, and that it's equal for these exact situations, because when we vote for these people, they have a job to do. And unfortunately, we can see what it's like to do a good job, and we see what it's like to not do a not so good job. And so to tie it all back to making sure that people are voting, making sure that you are making your voice heard, making sure that you're electing good people that are going to take care of you when the time comes to be able to do that. And we can see now that this pandemic is a perfect example of making sure that you have the right people in the right places when it's time for us to be able to look to them for leadership and how they're going to help us continue to be safe.
Yeah, and if you're what you just said there, if you're someone who's kind of not sure, well, I'll vote or I won't vote, elections have consequences is exactly right. Just remember that and have a say in who is elected, and get out there and make sure you do so and vet. Look, I've always said this: I want my elected leaders to be smarter than me. And I'm not that bright, and I'm telling you, I'm smarter than most of them right now. It's just the way I feel. Heck, maybe one of these days, Kendra, maybe one of these days I'll run for office.
I'm ready to support you. We know where to write the check.
I guess so. Hey, as we wrap things up, what would you say to anyone that's watched the program? You say get involved in stuff. What can people do if they want to voice their opinion on the redistricting? How would you suggest them reaching out to who? Just a couple minutes, then we gotta wrap it up.
So I will say that Next steps is, so as we're happening right now, the Senate is already on the floor taking a vote for the maps. Next up is in a House. I would say contact your House members and tell them that this map is just not good. It's not good for the people of Tennessee. It's just not good for democracy to be able to have that. It's the power of a constituent. You have your voice, you have your vote. And to say, with this process, we can see how you are being self-serving. And we're going to make sure that we do everything we can to stay involved and be involved so that we can be able to elect people that we know are going to work on behalf of all of Tennessee and not just for their political party. So I think that just making sure to reach out to your elected officials. We've sent newsletters on how people can be able to contact their elected officials. You can follow our website, follow our social media at the Equity Alliance on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to be able to make sure that you have direct contact with the people that are making these decisions. I think that that's best served to say, because what you can't say is that nobody told them.
There you go.
We're going to tell them.
Kendra Lee with the Equity Alliance, thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us from Memphis, and we'll certainly be following this as it moves along. More to talk about, but we really appreciate you coming on today.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care. Have a good weekend, ma'am. Appreciate her coming on. We'll take a break. Be back with a programming note right after this. Thank you.